I am recording right now. Oh, someone already recorded. Okay, we're good.
Okay. All right. All right. Good evening, everybody. We're excited to welcome you to another Tuesday night topics with the IDSA. We've got some great stuff lined up tonight with all about service and fundraising. So we're gonna turn things over to Jen and Brett, and they're gonna share with us tons of information.
Thank you, Sally, and shout out to Sally Phillip from Hinsdale. She is president-elect, and Brian Vasario, he is at Deerfield. Can't see him right now, but he is our current president. So thank you guys for that introduction.
Yes, thank you. My name is Brett, and I work at Stevenson as the school's community service coordinator. So the talk tonight is going to be about service and fundraising. But before we dive into service, I kind of want to frame that discussion. We were seeing very inauthentic involvement from a lot of our students about 5-6 years ago at Stevenson. Maybe you've seen some of the same things. We'd call them checkbox kids. You know, the type of kid that would come to one club meeting and then quit, or one club meeting and mark it down on their resume and try to pile up like 20 clubs and then tell colleges that they were, you know, active members of these things in an attempt to get into college, you know, trying to game the system basically. And we kind of took a hard look at what we were doing, and we came to the realization that we may have set up systems in a way that encouraged that type of behavior. We may have been manipulating students to do things inadvertently. So we decided to really make a big push towards authenticity. And so you've got a quote here from Brene Brown. She's a social researcher. You've probably, you know, read some of her books. But Ted Gergen and I, you know, gave a presentation at our school in a lunch and learn about authenticity, with service being a component and club leadership and club involvement being a component of that talk. So what I want to show you next is a video that we thought was pretty thought-provoking, and it really led to some major changes at our school. It's a news segment from about, I think, 5 years ago, and it talks about something called Turning the Tide out of Harvard University, part of the Making Caring Common project. So it's about a 5-minute video, but I think it's worthwhile just to listen and watch. And then hopefully you'll see how some echoes of this are kind of coming through this COVID era that we're experiencing right now. So,
and I think it's interesting too, before we begin that, is to reflect for yourself, those of you who have been maybe at your school or in you know, either at your school or other schools over the last 5 years, if you've actually seen a shift in this mindset.
Thank you.
A new report coming out this morning could fundamentally change the college admission process. Administrators from top colleges and universities are launching the document, Turning the Tide. It comes from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. The report examines the application system and offers specific improvements. New York Times columnist Frank Bruni looked at the growing concern in his new article. He's also the author of Where You Go Is Not Who You'll Be, an antidote to the college admissions mania. We're pleased to have Frank Bruni back in Studio 57. Welcome.
Thanks. Good to see you.
This has been an issue that you've written about before.
Yeah.
So what's going to change in the admissions process from this report?
Well, the report can't command change, but the report is signed off on, endorsed by so many people at top universities that it clearly indicates a desire and an intention to do things differently. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see in bits and pieces over the coming years the admissions process become less slave to the metrics that have been used so far. Already, you have a lot of schools saying SATs, ACTs optional. You have schools saying they're not going to be as impressed by a huge load of AP courses. And what they're trying to do is get kids away from a sort of incredibly dutiful script following during high school and encourage more genuine passions in them and figure out a way to judge them by the way they commit to those passions.
I think this is exciting. This is a really big deal, I think, because you said it could put an end to that manic resume padding that so many people have done in the past, but it also levels the playing field for kids that don't get the opportunity to get the tutors that come in here. And that they'll pay attention to other things like what, Frank?
Well, I pay attention to things like civic engagement. One of the things this report goes into at great length, which I thought was very interesting, is it's telling admissions officers, let's stop being impressed simply by the name of a charitable organization that a kid has worked for. Let's really find a way through essays, through letters of recommendation, to figure out whether that charity work was genuine, heartfelt, and sustained, or whether it was just checking off another box on this is what they want to see in Cambridge.
Or whether, to that point
Kids specifically, the report addresses the connection between academic pressure and mental health issues. And it says middle and upper income communities, rates of depression, delinquency, substance abuse, and anxiety appear to be considerably higher.
Yes.
Why is that?
Because kids feel like they have to nail things in a very certain way. As admissions rates have dropped at many top schools, they're all competing against each other in a more ferocious way. And they're getting the message, partly from the admissions process, but also partly from their parents. And parents need to step up here. They're getting the message that if they don't hit a certain marker, get into a certain kind of school, they've failed in life and forevermore will be behind the 8 ball. And that message is so destructive. It's not only that we see those high rates of mental illness in kids in high school, but every university is reporting record numbers of kids coming in for treatment to their mental health services on campus, and that's becoming a bigger and bigger problem.
But the bottom line is they're looking at how do you look and make sure that you're not leaving behind some really terrific kids who don't have the privilege that other kids have.
Which is key. I mean, the context for this is we're living in a country with yawning income inequality. And higher education is asking, very appropriately, more than ever, what's our part in social mobility? How do we remedy that? And one of the reasons you're seeing schools step away from standardized tests is there's a lot of research that what standardized tests judge more than anything else is family background income, the income of your family. And so they're trying to say, what are the markers that really spot potential and don't just reflect privilege?
So pay attention to a kid who maybe has to stay home and help the family, or who has a part-time job because he has to help the family and can't be engaged in community services.
Right, and recognize the character in that kid.
Yes.
And that character is going to be as key as any load of AP courses.
Yeah. So how realistic is this, Frank, that you think that this will actually happen?
I don't think we're going to see an overwhelming sea change in one admission cycle. But when you look at the number of people who've signed off on this, when you look at the fact that at the news conference today here in New York, someone from Yale will be there, the Dean of Admissions, someone from MIT, someone from University of Michigan, you are clearly seeing a signal that admissions offices are going to make some changes. I think over the next 5 years, we'll see big changes.
You also write about a 2014 survey of 10,000 middle and high school students about what they thought was important. And what did they find?
Well, the author of this report is the person who did that research. They asked these kids what matters most, individual achievement, happiness, or caring for others. And they were shocked to find that only 22% said caring for others. And that's pretty interesting because when you get a question like that, you know what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to say something high-minded. So if you're admitting off the bat, I don't care about others, I won't care about my happiness and achievement. And they said that's clearly, we've got to figure out where they're getting that signal.
Did those answers have anything to do with background?
I don't know if they broke it down that way, but what they're asking in this new report is to what extent does the college admissions process bring about those values and exacerbate the problem of an obsessive focus on individual achievement and where do I rate and what's my status in society.
It's a very
Really
encouraging
interesting.
sign.
Yeah, really
Thank you, Frank. Always good to see
Good
you.
to see you.
So I saw that, and we at Stevenson thought that was pretty fascinating. It gets into a lot of different things: college admissions, standardized testing, but of course, community service. And then we kind of began to ask ourselves some questions. Are we doing any systemic things that are eliciting behaviors that we don't want to see? Well, after we saw that particular episode of that news program, we looked into the Turning the Tide report out of Harvard. And a number of schools signed on to this back in 2016 as a way to change their admissions processes. And one of the things they said they were really looking for was that idea of meaningful, sustained community service, authentic community service. Because these schools had decided they don't want those checkbox kids. Those checkbox kids, when they get to their campus, they're not the leaders. They're not the students who make those around them better people. And that's the type of kid that they want in their community.
Hey, Brett, can you speak to some of the systemic things that probably a lot of our schools might engage in, or that you saw at Stevenson? You can speak to Stevenson.
Yeah, and they're coming up here, and I'll just kind of preview one of them. One of the biggest things we found was basically the carrot and stick way of managing students. So I think we do that a lot without realizing it. If we want kids to do something for us, we either threaten, we're going to remove this, we're going to take this away. But more often we offer carrots. And one of those big carrots in a community service context is the idea of the service hour. And that, to me, is the most destructive thing you can do as a school. Not only is it helpful, it's actively destructive. So if you have to manipulate students by offering the service hour and it becomes monetized in your school, almost like money, and kids are begging to do things and negotiating like, well, I won't do it for 5 service hours, but if you throw me 10, I'll be there and I'll do that thing for you for an hour. It just became a very dirty thing, and we just knew that we had to eradicate that. So that's one of the systemic things. And when you really take a hard look at that, a lot of people don't want to go there because then they'll anticipate, well, if we take that away, will kids do those things we want them to do? And then you have to come to that other really hard realization that if you've got to manipulate kids to do that thing maybe needs to go. You might need to kill that event. Because if it's not meaningful enough for the kids to show up in an authentic way, then why manipulate them to do that? So we'll get into some more of that in a little bit, but that's just one of the things. Turning the Tide 2 came out a couple of years later, and basically they doubled down on what they said in Turning the Tide 1. And so you see some of the things that were said in that report right here. And the messages keep getting stronger and stronger as more and more colleges are signing on that, hey, we want to get away from this SAT, ACT, IB, AP. Tell us about your 1,000,000 clubs, tell us about how many hours of community service, everything monetized and quantified, because that really wasn't working for them in the admissions processes. And then here's, of course, a couple more things here related to character that comes out of doing community service and the character coming out of doing other things like working a job or helping out at home. So just to kind of show you how some admissions processes are changing and the way that they're asking about things. It used to be, populate your resume with everything you can think of and send it in because we're gonna take a look at everything. And you see here at the U of I, they don't want that. Don't include everything. More often you're seeing things on these apps where they ask kids to discriminate and pick things that are meaningful and tell why these things have been meaningful and what sort of impact the students have had when they engage in these activities. So here's one from Texas. Again, opening up the possibility for talking about things that they've done with their family or in certain organizations, but again, kind of picking and choosing and maximums. Only tell us about 3 things, only tell us about 5. If you're in 20 clubs, we don't want to hear about the 20. You pick the ones that were most meaningful. Here's Vanderbilt. Again, the messages are pretty consistent. And then here's MIT.
And I think this is probably my most favorite. Speaking from an activity director lens, and I know we're a mixed group here with probably advisors and activity directors, but for me specifically, when a student wants to propose a club to start at my school, I love this question. If you couldn't put it on your college application, would you still do it? And that does create some interesting conversation between students and myself. But
right.
that would be true for students in general who want to do an activity, right? To just list it on their application.
Right. And these are actually great conversations to have with kids to get them figuring out how to discriminate. We actually applaud students who decide to remove themselves from membership from certain clubs because it doesn't fit their schedule or they don't have time for it. So at Stevenson, we have 780 kids in our National Honor Society. So sometimes we'll have some kids come up to me and they'll say, I'm in 3 sports, I've got these other activities, I just can't meet the National Honor Society commitments and do these other things well. So I'd like to remove myself from National Honor Society. And we say, great. yeah, thanks for coming to that realization. We understand. You know, we'll be happy to remove you from that organization because you can't do everything, and you can't do everything well. I've even had some situations where, and maybe this is going to ring true for a lot of people listening, where you have an informational meeting for an event or a club or something like that. And kids get so used to signing in to get something in return. So I don't know if that's a process that you have. So I had a kid come in for one of our events, a Give-a-thon leader informational meeting. And the student comes up to me and asks, well, where do I sign in? And I said, no, you don't sign in. This is an informational meeting to, you know, tell you about the event and tell you the why behind what we're doing and, you know, give you some skills necessary to carry this out. He looks at me and says, I don't sign in? Then why am I here? And I'm like, I don't know. Why are you here? So that's the classic checkbox kid. They were looking to sign in, get their name on a roster, get their name on a roll, and they thought that, you know, that got shot out to colleges or something, the fact that they were present in a physical location for a defined period of time. And this is what kids think is important, some kids. So getting into that, back in 2017, 2018 school year, we had kind of had it with that sort of mentality. We had an online platform for community service, but that platform was used mainly by teachers and admin, where we recorded and verified service hours for students. So they didn't have to do anything with it. It was an adult platform for adult use. We had an award called the 300 Club to recognize seniors with 300 or more hours. And then we had NHS admission based on hours of service and hours of leadership. So if they could show us 10 hours of service and 10 hours of leadership, and they met the GPA requirements and the character pillar, they were in. So it was all quantity. And so in this model, what happened was teachers and administrators would manipulate to get students to do what they wanted them to do, and students would consume. They'd consume those carrots that we put out for them in the form of service hours. So we got this sort of mindless student pursuit of hours in return for service work completed. It was transactional. And you know, students would determine if it was worth it for them based on the number of hours. And sometimes, you know, adults would kind of cheat it. Like, well, it's an hour of work, but I'll throw you 10 hours for this, right? So it's kind of like billable lawyer hours. You know, it could be inflated based on how much you wanted to manipulate this. So just to kind of show you an example here that we really try to get the students to understand. So imagine you're a college admissions counselor reviewing an app. Which of the following students is the best? Student A, B, C, D. So students would look at that and go, oh, wow, student D is going to Princeton for sure. That's 500s better than 100. You know, I'm not very good at math, but I know that's a bigger number. And none of these things, none of these quantities really tell you anything about quality. They don't tell you about impact. They don't tell you about authenticity. You don't have any idea of what the student did or why. And in fact, we even had some students. I had a student who applied for the 300 Club, had 450 hours, all in one place. And they were doing service at the kids, at the father's law office, filing legal papers. And based on those old requirements that we had to accept that. It was 450 hours, it was documented, a little sketchy in terms of meeting the service criteria. So we really had to flesh out our service criteria in a meaningful way, and then we really had to shift away from these numbers. So this kind of summarizes our old model versus our new model. So in the old model, you know, kids were just seeking these service hours almost like they were gold coins at the end of the rainbow, and they would just get jacked if they got a lot, and they would be disappointed if they got a few. The new model is getting completely away from those numbers, where kids would record evidence, there'd be photographic evidence, reflections, and tied to UN global goals. And again, old model versus new model. You got Gollum there with the precious ring. And that's kind of how kids would seek those hours. You know, just going for those hours, not really tied into the work or the meaning or the impact. And then of course the new model with the reflection. So we found shifting the language really readjust the focus for kids. And a lot of people, when they look at this, kind of poo-poo it, like, really, you know, just calling things by different names, does that really change behavior? And yes, it does, if you keep going back to it and you keep educating the students and you keep correcting and you keep focusing on the right-hand side of the screen as opposed to the left. So we shifted from hours, and now we call these things experiences. Anything we do at Stevenson, it's not how many hours of service did you do, but what were the experiences? Reflect on the experiences, tell us what you did, give us photographic evidence, and give us an adult contact that we could call or email to go ahead and verify and hear about the cool things that you did. And then we would go ahead and verify those cool things. So you move away from hours, turning in sheets, does it count, getting, earning, those counting metrics, to all these things over on the right-hand side.
And Brett, did you guys experience any pushback from the kids during this transition, or even the community?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Any change like this, you're gonna get pushback because people don't like to change. And so, yeah, we kind of had to educate the community. Yeah, constantly have to be leading with the why. You know, Simon Sinek, always start with why. And it really does take, it took us about 2 years to get to that tipping point. And then really when you get through this 4 years, no class has known anything different, right? Then that becomes culture. But you gotta be persistent enough to stick with it.
And can I ask you a question? I'm putting the cart before the horse because I know you're going to talk about interview in just a minute with the group. So did interview come into play first, or did you have this goal in mind and then find a product that fit your mission?
No, we had this in mind before interview came along. And then when interview came along, that almost gave us permission, like, here's the way.
Okay. So without saying any more about interview, I was just curious about that as we roll that out in the next couple slides. Yeah.
Right. And then when I talk about interview, most of the country that uses interview doesn't do it like we do it. They still use the hours model. So interview still lets kids record hours, but it has all the features to do the experience model with the reflections and the photographic evidence.
So
no
Brian?
If you're in that old model or new model, you can use interview, and you can shift from the old model to the new model while you're using interview.
So at this time, let's pause and see if we have any questions in our chat.
Yeah, this is Diana. I had a question in the chat of just like, I missed the beginning, so I'm not sure if it was covered or not, but with the way that we frame like recording anything, right, is that it's a useful transcript for students to reflect on, for them to support them with when they are applying to jobs, when they're applying to colleges, to think more deeply about their experiences. But as you transition to this like different wording and language, what is still like the purpose of actually doing verification? Like, why is it even necessary for students to do it?
I think it just goes back to that authenticity. So just making sure that you have an authentic process that's that what the students are putting out there have been verified as real, because these are public resumes that exist on interview. So when they put up their reflections and when they put up their pictures, we want it to be an accurate representation of the work that's actually happening that we know about at Stevenson. So even going to the experience model, theoretically, couldn't you still game that new system that way? You could make up service work, you could post a phony picture, you can make a phony reflection, but then—
I guess my question, sorry to cut you off, is just like, what is the point for students to do it? Like, is there something that like lures them in, that in your model of like there's a reason for them to be recording these things, other than maybe their counselors say like you should do this.
Well, yeah, because we just showed you in Turning the Tide that it is still super important, right? So they want students engaged in authentic, meaningful service. They want students involved in sustained service. So this is a way for them to record, to self-report, and have their own service resume that they could share or they can look back at later when they're writing things like their college resumes to really kind of hone in on, oh yeah, what were those most important service experiences that I had over the course of my 4 years? So we're not in this like bubble of nihilism, right? We're not saying that, well, we get rid of hours and nothing matters. It's kind of the opposite of that. We're getting rid of hours and we're saying to students, okay, community service is important. It's important for these reasons. Now let's pick and choose what you want to do so it aligns with your purpose and your passions and the things that you're interested in.
For sure. I was wondering if like maybe in your model, you're also still in the school setting, still using it for NHS, or if you've also gotten rid of Honor Society. So that's kind of where my question was leading to.
Yeah, no, we haven't gotten rid of National Honor Society yet, and I don't know in the near future if we would. I think I mentioned earlier we have 780 kids in. We try to keep it a relatively open and transparent process. So the way that kids would apply for National Honor Society, they'd have to have a clean character record, they'd have to meet the GPA requirements, and then they would have to go ahead and tell us about 3 significant service experiences, or one sustained service experience over time, and then do the same thing with leadership. So nothing with hours. It's again that sort of picking and choosing that you heard about in the Turning the Tide report. So we just say, you know, tell us about one important sustained service experience that you did and give us the adult contact. Tell us about, you know, one sustained leadership experience that you did and give us the contact. And then we check those and we verify those. And if everything checks out, they're in National Honor Society. There's no sort of subjective selection process. It's transparent in that manner.
Any other questions? Okay.
All right, so as we're getting into interview, this is an example of one entry on interview. So this student was involved in our Collection Day for Give-a-thon, which is our holiday gift program. It's a lot like Wish at Libertyville. And so you see all they did was they uploaded a picture. That's them at the Collection Day. You see the gifts behind them. They talked about, you know, their impact and why it was meaningful. Interview does ask you to put the hours in because it's a national website. But from Stevenson's perspective, we make it clear that those hours aren't tracked in any way by Stevenson. The one cool thing that happens here on interview, if you put the hours in, is you get metrics on how their time was spent. So they understand what's important to them. So I do like that portion of interview that comes out of the hours, just not the tracking of the hours as, you know, something that's monetized basically. So another cool thing that interview allows you to do is to go ahead and tag these different service opportunities by the United Nations Global Goals. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this screen, and each of these will flip over, and then you'll see photographic evidence on interview for each of these UN Global Goals. So poverty, hunger, quality education, life on land, life on water. And if something kind of overlaps the goals, you can pick partnership for the goals, which is that number 17 in the lower right-hand corner.
I love this tool too. Like if you're having conversations with kids that want to do service and they are unsure of what service they want to do, or they come to you with some random service project, this is a nice reference to say, let's look at the global goals and how does this fit, or where can this fit, and what is your passion? What do you feel strongly about? I think that's a really nice resource.
And it's a nice way to connect your local service projects to global things as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're going to Bernie's Book Bank, you're helping with literacy in our area, but it's also a global goal of quality education around the world. So you kind of have that double tag. So Interview, it's not an app, it's a web-based program, but if you use it on a device like an iPhone, it optimizes to the iPhone. So over in the right-hand corner, you see how kids can go ahead and document. So if they're at an event, it's really easy just to kind of click through, snap a photo with their phone, and then they could write the reflection right there, or they could just save it temporarily and then go home and sit down and write the full reflection for it. This is a screenshot of a student page from our school. I've kind of cut off her face so we can maintain some anonymity. But this is the landing page and what it looks like. So there's awards that generate from their service resumes, and the awards are partially due to hours, which I don't like, but that's a national award. The part I do like has to do with the number of experiences that are posted, and if there's reflections, and if there's photographic evidence. So they hit these different markers, these different awards, and they get little icons on their homepage here. And then they also get paper awards that are sent to your schools and pins. And it's really, really kind of cool at the end of the year. The kids come pick them up, and it has a lot of meaning for them. Down here, you see the infographics that are built from the data. So over on the right-hand side, you see the global impact based on the goals, and then based on the number of hours, they can see how they spend their time. So this particular student had a big focus on quality education and some sustainable development. Here's the hour meter if you're an hour school, but more importantly, like, how are you spending your time based on values, and what are your interests? So it's really kind of a nice place for kids to go back and understand, what they've done and what they've focused on.
And Brett, can you speak for just a second, because I think Interview is such a really cool program. Can you speak to opportunities that kids might find on Interview? Like that whole piece about what our kids are exposed to when they go onto the Interview website or app?
Yeah, so one big part of it, charities are constantly calling schools, right? Asking to have meetings with students, asking for volunteers for specific events. So a big part of my job is hooking up charities with accounts on Interview and having them populate Interview with these local opportunities that kids can sign up for. So Bernie's Book Bank had a weekly event that kids could sign up for at our school. We had tutoring programs that kids could sign up for, and the Brushwood Center at Ryerson Woods. So, as you start using Interview, you build a more and more robust service community out there where the nonprofits know, and they love this. They know if they post that all 4,500 plus Stevenson students in the school will see that opportunity, and they know it will fill. And it's going to fill because there's a little caption of what the event is about. There's pictures, and they're going to get kids that are aligned with those particular interests. So we haven't had a hard time at all filling service opportunities since we got rid of hours and went to the new model. And I can say that throughout the whole transition, we never had a problem getting kids to sign up for service. And we thought we would. We thought it would be kind of a learning proposition, and then we'd have to figure out new ways. But no, kids really started to sign up for things that they wanted to do, and they avoided the other events that they didn't. But maybe just because we're a big school, everything kind of worked out.
And what I particularly like too is that Stevenson isn't really in a silo with these opportunities. They might see on their app or the program opportunities of all surrounding areas. And when Libertyville goes on, they can see what Stevenson has out there and surrounding communities. So it's really a cool platform.
Yeah, and we've actually had some kids from Conant misread our opportunities and show up for our NHS events at Stevenson. It's like, no, you're in Conant's NHS. That was a Stevenson NHS event. But, really nice kids. And, we just call mom and dad, like, is it okay if they hang out and help us out with this event? Yeah. So yeah, there is that sort of interconnected web that happens. And then kids can invite other kids through social media to these links, which is nice. So it becomes kind of a recruiting tool to get kids to come to particular events. Another cool thing you get, and I can go on and on an interview, and I don't want this to be an interview session, so we'll try to cut the interview stuff short here, but interview gives you a lot of back-end analytics, and you can use those analytics to figure out who's using interview and who isn't, or get freshmen on board, find out which freshmen haven't been, active with their accounts, try to get them involved in service. And then you get these monthly infographics that give snapshots of what's happening in your school, what the most common value is that kids are reporting. And it's just something to kind of fun to report out or put on social media. We'll block out the hours part because we're not really concerned with that. But this is kind of cool that, these were the 4 biggest UN global goals for this particular month. And then these were all of the service activities counted to date by that particular month. And then again, a couple more infographics coming out of interview. So just a way to inspire and celebrate and put on social media and reflect pictures back to kids. Kids love to see photos of themselves, see photos of their friends, and then it actually gives students a vision of what's out there if they see these photos.
And it's meaningful. And it's at no cost, which is awesome too.
Yeah, so there are a lot of platforms like this out there at cost. And I've had a couple of them call me and I say, no, I'm very happy. This is totally free. I've got a relationship with the head of interview. Her name's Jen Mosen. So we talk a lot. And every time I talk to people about interview, I just say, like, why aren't you using it? It's free. They'll upload your entire school database of emails. They'll get your kids activating the accounts. And then it's just a matter of how much you want to use it. It's a very powerful tool, but you could use it in very simple ways or very complex ways. And so we have the whole spectrum of use at Stevenson. So let's go ahead and dive into service in the time of COVID, right? So we're remote. I believe all of us are remote, right? And maybe a few of us are thinking about going back hybrid. So there's a lot of challenges, like how do we do service in an all remote environment? And the challenges are numerous, so we won't delineate all of those right now, but we also have opportunities to do things that we haven't done before, ways to connect with people over Zoom that we haven't tried before because we haven't had to think about it. So one of the activities we'll talk about later, I heard some kids doing this and they said they had a blast, Zoom bingo with people in nursing homes. So nursing homes are looking for ways to socialize their residents. And these kids got on these Zoom bingos and they had a great time. So those kids who probably wouldn't have gotten on a bus to go to a nursing home to do that, well, now they have an opportunity to have that sort of service experience. They're more comfortable in a virtual environment. That's a win. So little things like that might be little wins that we can look forward to. So something we talked about, yeah, go ahead, Jen.
Oh, no, yeah, I was just going to say this, this whole idea of taking a bonfire to a campfire, it's a revisit for us. We talked a little bit about this in our homecoming presentation, but if we can approach service opportunities in much the same way in this conversation as we did with homecoming planning and other events, I think that's going to be really helpful for all of us, in addition to really thinking about what is it that we can do versus focusing on the can't.
Right. And not trying to force things that you've done in the past and just put a remote in front of it and try to make it happen. So like we had an awesome service event called Street Fest, food trucks, big stage, you know, fireworks out in the parking lot, raising $10,000 plus for charities. We looked at that whole event and we just said, there's no real way to do that in a meaningful way this year. We're kicking that to next year. That was a bonfire event that we couldn't make into campfires. But taking a look at some of the other things, how can we have lots of smaller events and still have kids engaged? And so you can read these bullet points on your own. You know, you're probably kind of going through them as we were just chatting a moment before, but anyway, we can move over more towards to small groups, individual, intellectual tasks instead of physical tasks, and really getting kids to think about social entrepreneurship. Instead of the bigger events where basically they'd kind of show up and we'd tell them what to do, right? So this is a little more difficult in that they have to identify a need and kind of make a plan and run with it. So in order to kind of navigate in this new environment, I think it's really important that kids understand what service is and what service isn't. So if you don't have community service criteria, like well-defined, this might be the time to go ahead and do that. And then these are our criteria here for Stevenson High School. So if kids meet these criteria, it's service and it quote unquote counts as an experience. If it doesn't meet these criteria, it's not service. So it is all about, you know, intent. So if the intent is to aid the community and it meets all these other criteria, we call it service. So how's it work in Remote Learning Plus, which is what we call it at Stevenson? Well, service now can be done anywhere. So basically kids just need to find a need, offer assistance, you know, reach out, do the work virtually, and then reflect on the experience and record evidence. And the awesome thing is interviews already set up to do that, to help them do that. So we already had an online tool that slides nicely into this COVID environment. So now we're going to go ahead and transition. I'm going to let Jen lead us through this here, just some ideas to navigate this remote environment.
Yeah, so we were thinking we wanted to allow you guys to walk away maybe with some inspiration, maybe some ideas of some things that we've heard kids planning and some other schools planning. And again, focusing on what we can do rather than what we can't do. So I'll just share a couple of things that Libertyville is thinking about doing, in addition to some real quick bulleted points of some ideas. So one thing that we're going to do to kick off our canned food drive event, this is has been a very successful event for us in the past. When we do our canned food drive event in October, November, it sustains our Libertyville Township Food Pantry for about 8 months out of the year. So it is a huge, huge event for us, and we don't want to lose this opportunity because we know it is so important for our community and they depend on us. So how can we do this during a pandemic? So we're trying to come up with creative ways to be able to do this versus just, you know, inviting the community to come drop off canned goods, which is, you know, something that we can offer. So we tried to get creative, and one of the things that we're going to initiate, we finally got approval from the township, which is super cool. We are going to invite the community to make a donation for as little as $1, up to as much as they want to donate. All proceeds will go to the Libertyville Food Pantry, but our student council will go and use a template and paint a paw print, which is one of our logos, paint a paw print in the street outside of their home. So the kids are talking about having decorating contests. So if the family wants to decorate that paw print, paint in it, write names in it, do whatever, that would be an opportunity. But with the whole idea of a slogan saying all roads lead back to Libertyville. So we are just really excited. We'd love to get paw prints painted throughout the entire community, with the idea that everything comes back to Libertyville. All of the proceeds would go to the township food bank, food pantry, and it's a nice way to bring the community into this event. Okay, so there's a question from Diane. Does it go outside the student's home or does it go in front of the donor's house? So the donor who it would actually go in front of the donor's house. So we would have a form on our web store, make the donation, leave us your address, and we would put the paw print in front of the donor's home. And I guess they could, we haven't really thought too many logistics yet, but I guess if they wanted to designate another address, that would probably be feasible too. So another event that we are super excited about is something we're calling a trunk or treat event. Our junior class council is also planning this event for a canned food drive kickoff. And the idea is to invite our student population to decorate jack-o'-lanterns on their own at home, or create a scarecrow and drop those off the week of Halloween. And we would collect these things for prizes and have a contest. But then we want to hold an event on the 30th of October called Trunk or Treat. And we would invite clubs and sports and other student groups to participate in this part of the event, where students of 2 or 3, because we think that's a safe number, might be 2, up to 3, would decorate a space in the parking lot, ideally the trunk of their car or a car. So they can theme the decoration. So maybe they want to do the theme of a Toy Story. And so they could decorate their car, they can dress in costumes. So these student groups would be spaced out along our parking lot with our jack-o'-lanterns lit with glow lights, glow sticks, and our scarecrows spread out on our campus. And we would invite our elementary schools to participate in this trunk or treat. We really wouldn't charge admission for this event, but we would ask for canned foods as a donation. So we would just light our jack-o'-lanterns. We would invite the community to walk through our sort of displays that the kids have done. And we are unsure if we're going to get permission to be able to pass out candy or have candy available on tables so that the kids could take those. But we just thought it would be a really fun community event, and at the same time collecting canned goods or non-perishable items for our food pantry. So then just some real quick touch points, and I'll go through these fast because you guys can go ahead and read through these. But these are some things that we thought, and there's several slides, that we thought students could do safely from their homes. One of those is making fleece blankets for Lurie Children's Hospital. This was very successful for us last year. They love those fleece blankets that are tied on the ends. You guys have probably seen those. They do need to be a certain dimension. So if this is a project that interests you, make sure you reach out to Lurie Children's to be able to do this. But they love this because they give the children these blankets when they arrive at the hospital. So that's super cool. Card creation for nursing homes. I've got several groups who are doing that right now. And our NHS right now are currently working on COVID packs that would include masks and hand sanitizer, gloves, and some other, and wipes and things for the homeless shelter in Libertyville. Another super successful project is chemotherapy care packages. So these could be little packages that people make that would be delivered to patients who are going through chemotherapy. And items would include candy that they can suck on, Kleenex, word searches, and things like that that you would give a patient who's going through chemotherapy. We just had our dance team work with our local park and rec in Libertyville, and they were invited to plant trees in one of the forest preserves, which is super cool because they could do that by themselves, you know, socially distanced from everybody else, in addition to local park cleanups. And then of course, a toy drive would be super easy at the holidays if people just dropped those things off at our school. And then Brett spoke a little bit about that earlier, the Zoom idea of like Zoom bingo and Zoom trivia with nursing home residents is an awesome idea. In addition to, like, we work with the Boys and Girls Club in Waukegan in North Chicago. So participating in trivia nights is a super, it's a great opportunity for our kids to connect with other kids or with nursing home residents.
And then I've got a lot of calls from nonprofits, really, old school nonprofits. It's remote. They can't have people on sites. They want to update their website. They need new videos. They need somebody to do social media. So they're calling the school asking for kids, individually want to do that work. So great individual opportunities for kids who have those tech skills.
And Brett, do you want?
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing our NHS is doing right now is they've taken a look at those UN global goals, and they're thinking about that campfire model of community service. And knowing we've got 780 members, how in the world do we get all these people active? So they're taking global goal by global goal and getting small groups together and asking them, okay, based on this goal, what can we do in a remote environment? And then having them put together the plan. And then if there's any sort of funding or materials, we talk through that plan, and we're going to try to get those launched, that whole social entrepreneurship angle. And then, of course, there's always opportunities for Zoom or Google Hangout tutoring. High school kids tutoring elementary and junior high is typically the model, that we see. And a lot of kids want to do that. I'll be running a blood drive at our school next week. And they said almost all schools have canceled their blood drives this year. But we found a way to do it safely in our sports center. And hopefully we'll be able to do a second drive this year as well. Anytime we do 2 drives, Vitalant gives us $2,500 to $3,000 for student scholarships. And we have a program at Stevenson called Stevenson to College that helps fund scholarships and mentorship programs for students who are the first in their families to go to college. And then another thing that a lot of people don't think about, but it is an election year. If students are engaged in any sort of political activism, that's an opportunity for photographic evidence and reflection. And I think that is community service if you're being a political activist and doing it in a meaningful way. So that's something that could be done easily in a remote environment as well. And then, of course, there's the gratitude projects. So I know our FMP has the freshmen write thank you notes to their grade school teachers. And that can work very well in a remote environment, either through snail mail or through email. So finally, we're going to get to a few fundraising things here in our last couple of minutes, Jen. One of the fundraisers we're doing at Stevenson in a remote environment, it centers around the idea of a fitness challenge. So I was going to run a marathon this year, the Chicago Marathon, but it got canceled, and I was running for Team Danny did. So instead of me running a fake marathon and trying to raise money, I asked them, well, can we use this as an opportunity to get kids moving and involved in the challenge? So they came up with the 1 in 26 challenge. 1 in 26 people are diagnosed with epilepsy at some point in their lives. There's 26 miles in a marathon, and we had a goal of $260 to fundraise. And so you see, so far we've raised about $3,000. We've got about 50 to 60 kids involved, I think. And here's how we track it. Everybody has wearables now, right? They have Apple Watches, or I have a Garmin. And so these link up with a site called Strava, and it keeps track of the miles, and you get leaderboards, and you can have discussions, and it creates kind of a cool online community where the kids are supporting each other, and we're comparing our times, and they notice how slow I am, and so it's fun, but also doing it for a good cause and getting them out there and moving and engaged in fitness.
So this is a super cool fundraiser, and I'm going to put Sally Phillip on the spot here. She didn't know I was going to call on her, but she actually showed this opportunity to me, and I've yet to do it, but I'm super excited to try to do it. Sally, do you want to talk about Double Good? I love the name because it really does reflect the organization.
Yeah, sure. It's I actually just left a student council meeting before this, and one of the kids brought it up and was like, "Hey, we need money. We can sell popcorn again." So this was a really easy fundraiser. We made well over $10,000 in 3 days. It's a 3-day popcorn sale, and it's all an app on your phone. And so all the kids get this app, and it's gourmet popcorn, and it is amazing. It's so good. We did it right before Thanksgiving so that people could order it for like holiday gifts. Like I ordered a bunch of it for my kids' coaches and that kind of stuff. And it comes packaged really nice, and you get half of the sale. So it all comes back. And I mean, well, half of it comes back to you. And seriously, 3 days, we made a competition of it out of all of our, the grade levels in our student council to see who could win the most, who could sell the most. And then we made an individual competition too, to make the top sale person got to be principal for the day and take over for our principal. And then he had to go to that student's classes for the day. And you can banter back and forth with the app on the phone too, kind of like Brett, your running challenge too. So it was a really easy fundraiser that the kids actually enjoyed and asked to do it again. So we might pop in there again too.
That's awesome. And I think what's super cool about this organization is that they give part of the proceeds from each sale to programs that help children with disabilities. And that is awesome. That's the double good part of the name in their company, which is awesome.
It is really cool.
So that's it.
Yeah. Do we have any other additional questions that we can answer for you?
Anyone have any questions?
Does anyone have any outstanding fundraiser ideas that you guys are doing this year that you think you would like to share with the group?
I'm gonna pop our feedback survey in here so that maybe we can.
Well, thanks so much for spending an hour with us. I think you can still catch a little bit of the presidential debate. I see it going on in the background of my house. It doesn't look like anybody's thrown any punches yet.
Yes, thank you all for joining us tonight for another TNT and for giving up your time watching the debate. Hopefully you recorded it and you can check it out on your own time. We did record this presentation again, and we'll put it up on our website later this week. We'd appreciate any feedback you have to give us. Thank you, Brett and Jen, some great ideas. I'm excited to bring a lot of these back to my school too. But we look forward to seeing you guys again next Tuesday, and we'll have the information out about that later this week too.
Thanks so much, you guys. Have a great rest of your night and a good week.